What if the greatest breakthroughs didn't begin with brilliance, but with a blunder? Welcome back to Everyday Inventions, the place where the ordinary becomes extraordinary and the forgotten gets the spotlight it deserves. In our last episode, we uncovered the timeless ideas that quietly power our modern world. From wheels to printing presses, from electric light to coded machines that birthed the digital age. But today, we're lifting the lid on something different. Something beautifully human. You see, not every breakthrough came from a moment of genius in a polished lab. Sometimes, the spark came from a botched experiment, a melted snack, a tumble off a shelf. We're talking about mistakes. Not the kind you regret, but the kind that, in the right hands, become miracles. That half-cleaned petri dish that saved millions of lives. The military radar that gave birth to the microwave. The clingy burrs on a dog's fur that inspired one of the most versatile fasteners in the world. These weren't part of some master plan. They were happy accidents, born of mess, misstep, and curiosity. And behind every one of them, a person who didn't throw the mistake away, but leaned in, looked closer, and asked, "What if?" So get comfy, because today we're diving into the glorious, messy, unpredictable side of invention. The part where failure becomes a teacher and error becomes evolution. Welcome to a world where a dropped flask becomes safety glass, where a faulty resistor becomes a pacemaker, and where the unexpected becomes unforgettable. This is Everyday Inventions. And this is where history's most powerful tool, curiosity, meets the beauty of imperfection. Our first story begins, not with thunder or fanfare, but with something much less glamorous, a messy desk. The year is 1928. Alexander Fleming, a brilliant but famously untidy Scottish bacteriologist, has just returned from a holiday. He steps into his cluttered London lab, probably still shaking off the vacation blues. Petri dishes sit stacked and forgotten on his bench, some covered in dust, some in worse. Then he sees it. One dish, left exposed. A strange mold has taken root in the middle. But what catches his eye isn't the fungus, it's what surrounds it. Or rather, what doesn't. Everywhere else, bacteria has grown like weeds. But around this mysterious mold, a clear, clean ring. An invisible shield. Like the mold was silently fighting back. Most scientists might have cursed the contamination and tossed it in the trash. But not Fleming. Where others saw a mistake, he saw a message. He leans in, studies the shape, the margin, the pattern of death and life, and names the mold Penicillium notatum. That accidental growth would go on to become penicillin, the world's first true antibiotic. But here's the twist. For years, no one really cared. Fleming's discovery sat mostly ignored, because producing it in large quantities was nearly impossible. That is, until a team of scientists in the US and UK, pushed by the urgencies of World War II, cracked the code of mass production. Suddenly, this mold became mightier than bullets. On the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, soldiers dying from infected wounds were saved in days, sometimes hours. Hospitals overflowed not with death, but with relief. By the end of the war, penicillin had slashed infection deaths by over 90%. It's been called the most important medical discovery of the 20th century. And it all started with a vacation, a messy desk, and one man curious enough to ask, why didn't the bacteria grow here? A mistake that saved millions. Next up, a story that starts not with science, but with snacks. It's the 1940s. World War II is raging, and deep inside a military lab, a self-taught engineer named Percy Spencer is working on something that sounds like science fiction, radar. Specifically, he's tinkering with a device called a magnetron, the beating heart of wartime radar systems. Now, Percy wasn't your average buttoned-up scientist. He had no college degree, grew up poor, and taught himself everything from radio to electrical engineering. He was curious, and always alert to the unexpected. One day, while working near an active magnetron, he feels something odd, warm. He reaches into his shirt pocket and pulls out a chocolate bar, now completely melted. Strange. Most of us would shrug and blame the heat. But Spencer? He leaned in. He grabs a bag of unpopped popcorn kernels, sets them close to the magnetron, and waits. Puff, puff, puff. The kernels explode into fluffy white clouds. Next, he tries an egg. It bursts in his colleague's face. And just like that, Spencer realizes something wild. Microwave energy can cook food. It wasn't part of the plan. No committee. No blueprint. Just a man, a machine, and a melted snack. The first prototype? A hulking, fridge-sized contraption called the radarange, taller than a grown man and weighing 750 pounds. It cost more than a car and needed water cooling. Not exactly kitchen-friendly. But by the 1970s, miniaturization and mass production made microwave ovens affordable, and by the 1980s, nearly every household had one. Today, we heat leftovers, pop popcorn, defrost meat, and reheat coffee in seconds. All because Percy Spencer noticed a melting candy bar and asked, why? One of history's greatest culinary inventions was an accident in a weapons lab. It's strange where ideas come from. Sometimes, they arrive back to back. Next time you're fumbling with shoelaces or wrestling a stubborn zipper, remember this. The universe gave us Velcro, thanks to a man, a dog, and a walk in the woods. The year is 1941, and Swiss engineer George de Mestral is out for a hike in the Alps. It's an ordinary day. Crisp mountain air, birds chirping, dog bounding ahead through the tall grass. After their walk, George notices something annoying. His dog is covered in burrs. Those clingy little seed pods are stuck to fur, socks, pants, everywhere. But instead of brushing them off and moving on like most of us would, George does what inventors do best. He gets curious. Back in his lab, he pops a burr under a microscope. What he sees astounds him. Each burr is covered in tiny hooks that catch onto the loops in fabric and fur. Hooks and loops. That's it. That's the entire mechanism. And in that moment, an idea sparks. What if this natural mechanism could be replicated? What if we could make a fastener that doesn't need tying, zipping, or buttoning? Just press and pull. It took George nearly a decade of trial and error. The biggest challenge? Finding a material strong enough to mimic those burr hooks and soft enough to hold the loops. He eventually settled on nylon, which could be heat-shaped and woven into tough, flexible structures. By 1955, the world had its first synthetic hook-and-loop fastener. George called it Velcro, a mashup of the French words velour, velvet, and crochet, hook. But people weren't convinced. At first, Velcro was considered too ugly for fashion. It found its first big break not in closets, but in space. NASA used Velcro in astronaut suits and spacecraft interiors to secure tools in zero gravity. Once the public saw it used by astronauts, the tide turned. Soon after, it exploded into the mainstream. Shoes, jackets, medical devices, sportswear, even cable management in electronics. What began as a hiking nuisance is now a global solution, all thanks to one man's curiosity and his burr-covered dog. Next up, not every invention that changed the world cured disease or powered machines. Some just walked downstairs. Let me take you to a naval shipyard in Philadelphia in the early 1940s. Richard James, a mechanical engineer, is working on something serious, designing springs that can stabilize sensitive instruments on ships. Precision matters. Tensions are high, it's worry. One day, Richard knocks a prototype spring off his workbench. But instead of crashing to the floor, it sort of walks. End over end. Gracefully. Most people would chuckle and pick it up. Richard? He saw magic. He rushes home and tells his wife, Betty, I think I just invented a toy. Betty wasn't so easily convinced. But she was a thinker too. She gave it a name, Slinky, meaning sleek and graceful. Then she backed the idea all the way. Richard refined the spring's size and tension until it could walk perfectly. They borrowed $500 and had 400 Slinkies made by a local machine shop. But toy stores weren't biting until Betty arranged a live demonstration at Gimbel's department store in 1945. And that's when it happened. Kids gathered. Mouths opened. Parents pulled out wallets. All 400 sold out in under 2 hours. The Slinky exploded into a toy phenomenon, not through flashy design, but sheer simplicity. It became a physics teacher's favorite demo for kinetic energy. NASA even used giant slinkies in zero-gravity experiments. But behind the fun was a twist. In the 1960s, Richard joined a religious cult in Bolivia and left the company and his family. Betty, now a single mother of 6, stepped in, took over the business, and kept the slinky alive. Today, over 300 million slinkies have been sold worldwide. It all started with an accident, a curious mind, and a woman who believed in the bounce. As one idea bounced around toy shops, another quietly reshaped science. Imagine spending years trying to create the world's strongest glue, only to end up with one of the weakest. That's exactly what happened to Dr. Spencer Silver at 3 meter in 1968. He was working on a super adhesive, but instead, he developed a glue that stuck gently, peeled away easily, and didn't leave a mark. It was a failure, until a colleague, Art Fry, had a Sunday morning choir problem. His bookmarks kept falling out of his hymnal. That failed glue? Perfect solution. He dabbed it onto slips of paper, and suddenly, notes that could stick and unstick were born. Still, the world wasn't convinced. 3M had to give away thousands of free samples just to show people how useful they were. And once they did, offices, homes, classrooms, covered in bright little squares of moments. Today, Post-it notes are more than reminders. They're brainstorming tools, love letters, study hacks, even art canvases. All because 2 minds looked at a failed invention and stuck with it. Moving on, we dive deep into most households' favorite breakfast snacks today, that is the cornflakes. In the late 1800s, tucked away in Battle Creek, Michigan, 2 brothers, John Harvey and Will Keith Kellogg, were running a wellness retreat. But this wasn't your average spa getaway. No sugar, no spices, no meat, just cold baths, strict routines, and food so bland it could bore your taste buds into submission. Dr. John Kellogg, a devout Seventh-day Adventist, believed that bland diets would curb unwholesome thoughts. Will, his quieter brother, helped in the kitchen, experimenting with food prep to match their spiritual philosophy. Then, a culinary accident. One night, they accidentally left a pot of cooked wheat out too long. The next morning, it had dried and gone slightly stale. But instead of tossing it out, they rolled it flat, and to their surprise, it broke into thin, crispy flakes when baked. And just like that, breakfast cereal was born. They called it Granos, and it was meant to be a health food. But Will saw something bigger. He began tweaking the recipe, eventually switching from wheat to corn, and yes, adding sugar. John was horrified. Their philosophies split, and so did the brothers. John stuck to his moral mission. He started the Kellogg Company and turned a dry health accident into a multi-million-dollar breakfast empire. Then came the mascots. Cartoon tigers, toucans, snap-crackling elves, turning cereal into fun instead of penance. What started as a religious health experiment became the heart of the modern breakfast aisle. And all because someone forgot to clean up the kitchen. From laughter to life-saving, let's keep going. In 1903, inside a quiet Parisian laboratory filled with test tubes, fumes, and the soft clink of glassware, French chemist Edouard Benedictus was having a fairly ordinary day. That is, until he got a little clumsy. While reaching for something on a shelf, he knocked over a glass flask. It fell. It hit the floor. And then, something strange happened. It cracked, but didn't shatter. No sharp shards. No glittering spray of broken glass. The flask held together like it had a secret glue inside. Benedictus, intrigued, retraced the steps. He realized the flask had once held cellulose nitrate, a type of liquid plastic used in early photography. A thin residue had remained, coating the inside. When the glass broke, the plastic held the pieces in place. Most people would have swept up the mess and moved on. But Benedictus? He saw potential. This failed break became the foundation for laminated safety glass. 2 layers of glass with a plastic sheet sandwiched between. Not only did it hold broken shards together, but it also absorbed impact, making glass stronger, safer, and smarter. Still, like many great ideas, it sat on a shelf for a while. Not until World War I, when injuries from shattered windshields became common, did the auto industry realize just how revolutionary Benedictus's clumsy accident could be. Today, safety glass is everywhere. It shields car passengers. It lines the windows of skyscrapers, letting light in while keeping danger out. It even protects shoppers from rogue baseballs, protesters, or the occasional runaway Segway. So the next time you see a cracked windshield that didn't cave in, remember, behind that quiet resilience is a broken flask, a forgotten chemical, and a chemist who saw possibility in the pieces. The pacemaker, a rhythm of errors. In 1956, inside a modest lab in Buffalo, New York, an engineer named Wilson Greatbatch was quietly tinkering with circuits. He wasn't looking to change the world. He was simply building a device to record heart sounds, a tool for doctors to study irregular heartbeats. But then came a tiny, life-altering mistake. While reaching for a resistor, a component that controls electric current, Greatbatch grabbed the wrong one. Slightly off in value, seemingly insignificant. But when he powered up the device, it didn't just record pulses. It started producing them. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm was steady, familiar, like a heartbeat. Greatbatch froze. Could this accidental circuit mimic the electrical signals that keep the human heart beating? Instead of scrapping it, he leaned in, refined it, and soon realized he hadn't made a recorder. He had stumbled upon a pulse generator, one that could restart a failing heart. By 1960, his prototype was implanted into a human patient, and it worked. The pacemaker was born. But it wasn't easy. Doctors were skeptical. Batteries were unreliable. The first models were bulky and invasive. But Greatbatch kept going, driven by a mix of science, faith, and stubborn optimism. Decades later, thanks to countless improvements, pacemakers became smaller, safer, and smarter. Now, millions around the world carry one, quietly pulsing 24/7, keeping hearts in rhythm. And all of it started with the wrong resistor. A simple slip-up that gave people more birthdays, more walks in the park, more hugs, more dances. Sometimes, it turns out, a mistake doesn't just save the day. It saves lives. Let's reflect on the lessons from this episode. What do all these stories have in common? A chocolate bar that melted. A petri dish left out too long. A resistor that didn't quite fit. They weren't moments of genius, at first. They were messes. Missteps. Accidents. But someone, somewhere, saw potential in what others would have just thrown away. That's the quiet truth of invention. It isn't always about blueprints and eureka moments. Sometimes it's about paying attention, about pausing where others walk past. It's the artist in the scientist, the dreamer in the engineer. It's the question, what if? It's the decision to keep poking, even when the manual says stop. It's a wild mix of curiosity, resilience, and just a little luck. From your microwave to the Velcro on your shoes, from sticky notes stuck to your fridge to the cornflakes in your bowl, they weren't always perfect. They weren't always planned. But they were noticed. And in the hands of someone bold enough to explore the unexpected, they became indispensable. So the next time something goes wrong, just look closer. There might be a world-changing idea in that beautiful mistake. At Everyday Inventions, we don't just celebrate the tools we use. We celebrate the beautiful, unpredictable, and often messy human journey that brought them into being. Because behind every breakthrough, there's a person. With doubts. With dreams. With a moment that didn't go as planned. But they kept going. And so, what began as an accident became an innovation that quietly reshaped the world. Next time, we're turning the spotlight on invention's most powerful muse, the heart. That's right, we're exploring creations born not in labs, but in love, in loss, in longing. From a broken heart that inspired a medical marvel, to a romantic gesture that turned into a billion-dollar brand. You'll see how emotion has always been wired into our tools, and how some of our most cherished innovations started with something deeply personal. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment, and share a mistake you've learned from. Because sometimes, just sometimes, failure is the first step toward greatness. And trust us, the stories behind things, they're just getting started.